Lyra hated the ceremonial blade because it always seemed to know when people were watching. On ordinary mornings, when the academy courtyard was empty and Vaelora's twin sons had barely risen beyond the Silver Mountains, she could sometimes lift the weapon high enough to convince herself that she was improving. But during public trials, with 300 students arranged in disciplined rows and instructors standing beneath the floating banners of the warrior clans, the gravitic blade became a personal enemy. Its internal mass regulator hummed the moment her fingers wrapped around the black grip, multiplying its resistance until her arms trembled. "Lift," Instructor Varric ordered. Lyra clenched her teeth and pulled. The weapon rose perhaps 10 centimeters. Someone laughed behind her. Another voice whispered, "Featherbones." Lyra heard it clearly. Vaeloran ears were longer than human ears and unfortunately excellent at collecting insults from impressive distances. She tried again. Her pale fingers whitened around the handle, her long blonde hair slipped across her face, and the blade rose another few centimeters before dropping with a metallic crack against the platform. The courtyard erupted in laughter. Varric's expression tightened. "A warrior controls the weapon does not control the warrior." Lyra stared at the blade. Could someone explain that to the weapon? A few students choked back surprised laughs. Even Varric's mouth twitched before discipline returned to his face. Again. Lyra tried. Again she failed. Across Vaelora, children her age could carry training blades twice this weight while wearing gravity restraints. Some could sprint through artificial pressure corridors designed to simulate combat on heavy worlds. Lyra became exhausted climbing 3 flights of stairs. Her medical examinations showed nothing curable. Her muscle density was simply lower than the Vaeloran norm. The academy physicians called it a developmental irregularity. The students preferred weak. Her mother never used either word. Commander Seraya always told Lyra that bodies were only one part of a warrior, although those words had become harder to believe as Seraya's departure approached. That evening, Lyra stood inside Docking Ring 7, while cargo drones moved around them, and the exploration cruiser Sovereign Dawn waited beyond the transparent pressure wall. Seraya knelt before her daughter, her dark command armor reflecting the blue navigation lights. She had the same long ears as Lyra, the same pale complexion, but everything else seemed built from certainty. 3 years, Seraya said. Maybe less. You said maybe 2 last month. Commanders are allowed to lie optimistically. That sounds like a dangerous military policy. Seraya smiled, but sadness remained behind it. Her mission would carry the cruiser beyond the Helix frontier, through unstable wormhole corridors where communication could take months. She placed a small crystalline transmitter into Lyra's hand. "If you need me." "The signal will take 47 days. "I know." "So if someone attacks me, I should politely ask them to wait?" Seraya laughed softly and pulled her close. "You think too much." "Everyone else says I don't fight enough." Seraya held her tighter. For one moment, Lyra wished she would cancel the mission. But commanders did not abandon expeditions because their daughters were afraid. The Sovereign Dawn departed before midnight, becoming a silver point beyond Vaelora's orbital shield, and then disappearing into the black mouth of a jump corridor. Life at the academy continued without mercy. Weeks passed. Lyra lost races, failed strength examinations, and became increasingly skilled at pretending she did not care. What nobody noticed was that she rarely lost tactical simulations. She memorized drone patrol patterns after seeing them once. She could predict when opponents would charge, where instructors would place hidden objectives, and which students would panic when a plan collapsed. None of it mattered in a culture that worshipped strength loudly enough to drown out subtler talents. Then Marcus Hale arrived. He was human, which immediately made him interesting because humans had an irritating reputation for surviving places where sensible species had decided survival was unnecessary. Marcus was repairing defense drones beside the academy courtyard when he saw Lyra during another combat exercise. Kaelor, the largest student in her class, charged her with a padded plasma staff. Lyra stepped left before he moved. He adjusted. She stepped right before he moved again. She avoided him 6 times without throwing a single strike. On the 7th, her weak legs betrayed her and she fell. Kaelor touched the staff to her shoulder.
Dead. Congratulations,
Lyra muttered from the ground.
You defeated a girl who weighs less than your breakfast.
Laughter followed. Marcus did not laugh. He had stopped working entirely. Again, he said. Varric looked toward him.
This is academy training, human.
I noticed. Very dramatic. Marcus wiped grease from his hands and pointed at Lyra. Make him attack her again. Kaelor grinned. Lyra frowned.
Do I get a vote?
No, Marcus said.
Excellent. I'm already enjoying human democracy.
Kaelor attacked. Once again, Lyra moved before his shoulders turned. Marcus watched carefully. Second attack. Third. Fourth. Lyra escaped each one until fatigue slowed her. Marcus stepped onto the platform and looked at Varric. You keep calling her weak.
She is weak.
Physically? Sure. Marcus glanced at Kaelor. So is a computer terminal. Still wouldn't headbutt one. The students laughed. Varric folded his arms. Marcus crouched beside Lyra. How did you know where he was going? She shrugged.
His left foot turns before he attacks.
Marcus looked at Kaelor's feet, then at Lyra. Something in his expression changed. And nobody taught you that?
Nobody teaches me much anymore.
Marcus stood slowly. That, he said, might be the first intelligent mistake this academy has made. Marcus did not begin Lyra's training with a weapon. He began with a cup of water.
This is insulting,
Lyra said, staring at the metal cup balanced on her palm. Good. Insult is lighter than a gravitic blade. Marcus stood on the opposite side of an abandoned maintenance chamber beneath the academy, surrounded by broken cargo drones, magnetic clamps, and enough loose machinery to make the room look as if an engineering department had exploded. Between them floated 6 circular platforms, each suspended inside a weak artificial gravity field. Walk across. Lyra looked at the platforms, then at him.
That's it?
Without spilling the water.
And this makes me a warrior?
No, it makes you someone who can carry water. We're starting realistically. She rolled her eyes and stepped onto the first platform. It tilted immediately. Water splashed across her boot. Marcus tapped something onto his datapad. Impressive. 12 seconds.
You're recording this?
Future historians deserve accuracy. Lyra tried again, and again. By the 9th attempt, she had discovered that the platforms responded not to weight, but sudden movement. She slowed her breathing, softened her steps, and allowed each platform to settle before transferring her weight. Marcus said nothing. That irritated her more than criticism would have. On the 15th attempt, she reached the other side with half the cup remaining. Terrible, Marcus said. Lyra's long ears twitched.
Half is terrible?
If I ordered a drink and received half, yes. She threw the remaining water at him. Marcus leaned aside, reflexes improving. Their training continued every evening after academy lessons. Marcus ignored nearly every traditional Vaeloran exercise. Instead of increasing the mass of Lyra's weapons, he decreased it. Instead of demanding longer sprints, he made her run through shifting gravity corridors where the floor could become a wall without warning. He programmed maintenance drones to chase her through storage tunnels, always moving slightly faster than she could comfortably escape.
Why are they making that noise?
Lyra shouted during one session as 3 spherical drones pursued her, producing a cheerful musical tone. Psychological warfare.
It sounds like children's music.
Exactly. Imagine dying to that. Motivation. She hated him for approximately 6 minutes, then realized she was laughing while running. That frightened her almost as much as the drones. For years, training had meant humiliation. With Marcus, Failure became information. If she fell, he asked why. If she lost, he asked what she had noticed before losing. He never told her to become stronger than Kaelor or faster than the Academy champions. Your people have a strange obsession with fighting the opponent they wish they had, he told her one night. Fight the opponent who's actually standing there.
What if he's twice my size?
Then congratulations, he's provided more target. Weeks became months. Lyra's body changed slowly. Her endurance improved, her balance sharpened. Yet Marcus seemed far more interested in her mind. He placed her inside tactical simulators where holographic soldiers attacked from unpredictable angles. At first, she tried to defeat them directly and failed. Then she began watching. One drone always protected another before attacking. A second hesitated when its sensors encountered reflective surfaces. A third recalculated its path whenever Lyra crossed a magnetic marker. She stopped fighting the machines and started manipulating them. During one exercise, Marcus programmed 6 combat drones to guard a glowing objective in the center of the chamber. Lyra lasted 19 seconds on her first attempt, 28 on the second. By the 7th, she simply stood behind a support column and watched them. Marcus waited. Are you planning something?
Yes.
Anything I should know about? Probably not. She removed a small diagnostic transmitter from the wall, altered its frequency, and tossed it across the chamber. 2 drones rotated toward the false signal. She activated the emergency magnetic locks. One drone slammed into the floor. Another fired at the moving target and struck its partner. Lyra redirected a repair bot into the remaining formation, triggering collision avoidance protocols that forced the last 3 drones into one another's firing lanes. 43 seconds later, the objective stood unguarded. Lyra walked calmly across the room and touched it. Marcus looked at the destroyed machines. Those were expensive. You said win. I was hoping for a financially responsible victory. For the first time, Lyra smiled before he did. Word of the strange human training spread through the academy. Students began watching from upper walkways. Kaelor laughed when he saw Lyra balancing across gravity platforms. Training to become a servant, he called. Months earlier, the insult would have followed her home. Now Lyra glanced at the cup in her hand. Maybe? You want water? The watching students laughed at Kaelor instead. His face hardened. Marcus noticed but said nothing until later. You enjoyed that? A little. Dangerous. Why? Humor encourages humans. We become unbearable. One evening, Marcus shut down the chamber lights and activated a single holographic battlefield. Hundreds of red markers appeared around Lyra. You're surrounded, he said. No reinforcements, no heavy weapons. Your squad is exhausted. What do you do? Lyra studied the projection. Where's the enemy commander? Marcus smiled faintly. Why? Because everyone else would ask how to survive. She enlarged the map. I want to know what he thinks I'm going to do. Marcus stopped smiling. Lyra traced 3 enemy formations, then pointed toward an apparently useless canyon behind their lines. He expects retreat here, so I'd make him believe he's right. And then? I'd leave the canyon empty and attack his communications hub while he closes the trap. Marcus stared at her for several seconds. You know, most students answer, fight bravely. That sounds stupid. It usually is. He switched off the hologram. Darkness briefly filled the room before the maintenance lights returned. Lyra looked down at her hands. They were still narrow, still weaker than those of nearly every warrior in her class. Marcus? Yeah. Do you actually think I can become one of them? He looked toward the academy towers visible through the small observation window. No. Her face fell. Marcus turned back to her. I think that's been your problem from the beginning. You keep trying to become one of them. He tapped 2 fingers gently against her forehead.
I'm training you to become the first one of you. Lyra said nothing.
Somewhere above them, the academy bells announced the beginning of night cycle. For once, the sound did not remind her of another day she had failed to become what everyone expected. It sounded like time she had not wasted. By the time Lyra turned 16, nobody at the academy called her Featherbones within hearing distance. Not because she had grown enormous or suddenly developed the dense warrior musculature Vaeloran instructors admired, but because the last student who had used the name during a tactical exercise spent 40 minutes trapped inside his own simulation bunker while Lyra calmly completed the mission without him. Marcus insisted this had been an educational accident. Lyra insisted the door had chosen wisely. Her body remained lean, her pale features almost delicate beside the broad-shouldered cadets around her, and her long blonde hair was usually tied behind her pointed ears before training. Yet she moved differently now. Every step had purpose. Every glance measured distance, rhythm, balance, exits. She no longer entered a room wondering who was stronger than her. She entered wondering who was predictable. The Academy tournament arrived beneath a sky crowded with orbital frigates and drifting observation satellites. Thousands gathered inside the circular arena, while holographic banners hovered above the stands, displaying the crests of Vaelora's warrior houses. Marcus sat in the lowest row, eating something wrapped in paper.
What is that?
Lyra asked through her communicator. Food.
It's glowing.
Human military tradition.
That explains nothing.
Most traditions don't. She almost laughed, but the arena gates opened before she could answer. Her opponent walked through the opposite entrance. Kaelor had changed over the years as well. He was taller, heavier, and strong enough to wield a full gravitic staff at combat setting. The spectators cheered when he activated it. Blue energy crawled along the weapon's edges. Lyra looked down at her own short training blade. Marcus's voice came quietly through the comm. Remember.
I know.
Say it. Lyra sighed.
Don't fight his fight.
Good. Also try not to get hit. I've grown emotionally attached to your skull. The signal sounded. Kaelor charged immediately. He had become faster than she remembered. Lyra barely slipped past the first strike. The staff carved through a holographic pillar behind her, scattering blue fragments of light. Kaelor turned and attacked again. Lyra retreated. The crowd began murmuring. To them, it looked familiar. The weak girl running from the stronger warrior. Kaelor smiled. Still afraid to fight?
Terrified,
Lyra said, stepping backward.
You're extremely large.
He swung harder. She ducked.
And apparently angry about it.
His smile vanished. Lyra continued retreating toward the arena's outer ring, where gravitational plates changed intensity every 30 seconds to test adaptability. She had memorized the sequence during the opening ceremony. Kaelor had not. First increase in 3, 2, 1. The gravity beneath his right foot doubled. His stride shortened for half a second. Lyra struck his wrist and withdrew. Not enough to win, enough to annoy him. Kaelor roared and pursued. She let him. Around the arena they moved, Lyra never meeting his strength directly, always forcing him to turn, accelerate, stop, recalculate. He shattered 2 holographic barriers and nearly caught her against a wall, but she triggered a decoy field with the heel of her boot. 3 false versions of Lyra appeared around him. Kaelor struck the nearest. His staff passed through light. "Cheap trick!" he shouted.
Thank you.
That wasn't a compliment.
Still taking it.
The audience laughed, and anger made him careless. Marcus watched without moving now. Kaelor attacked the second decoy, then the third. By the time he found the real Lyra, his breathing had become heavy. She noticed the same old detail she had seen when she was 12. His left foot rotated before every committed attack. Some habits survived growing up. Kaelor lowered his shoulder. Lyra waited. His foot turned. She stepped aside at the final instant. His momentum carried him onto a gravity plate as it shifted to triple intensity. Kaelor dropped to one knee. Before he could rise, Lyra's blade touched the narrow seam beneath his collar. The arena became silent. The judges' drones descended, scanning the strike position. A green light flashed above Lyra. Victory. For several seconds, she did not move. 4 years of laughter, failed tests, trembling arms, spilled water, and endless nights inside Marcus's ridiculous maintenance chamber seemed to gather behind that single green light. Then the arena erupted. Lyra lowered her blade. Kaelor remained kneeling, staring at the floor. She offered him her hand. He looked at it suspiciously. "Are you going to throw me?" "I couldn't lift you if I wanted to." After a moment, he laughed and took it. Later, Marcus found her alone beneath the arena, sitting beside a row of dormant combat drones. "You won," he said. "I noticed." "Very observant. Training is paying off." Lyra looked at the medal in her palm. "I thought it would feel different." Marcus sat beside her. "Victories are rude that way." "Everyone saw me beat him." "Yes." "Then why do I still hear them?" Marcus understood without asking who she meant. The old voices. Weak. Frail. Not enough. He leaned back against the wall. "Because Kaelor was never your hardest opponent." Lyra stared at him. Marcus tapped the medal. "Tomorrow, nobody cares about this. Tomorrow you wake up with the same question you had yesterday." "Which is?" "Whether you believe you belong here." Lyra was silent for a long time. Above them, the crowd continued celebrating. Finally, she closed her fingers around the medal. "I think I'm starting to." Marcus nodded. "Good." A distant alarm suddenly sounded somewhere beyond the academy towers. Not the tournament bell. Not a training signal. Marcus's expression changed first. Lyra stood. Through the narrow window at the end of the corridor, 3 burning objects were descending from orbit. Then a fourth appeared, behind them. And a fifth. Marcus stared upward. "Well," he said quietly, "apparently the universe heard you were becoming confident, and took that personally." The first impact struck beyond the eastern defense wall and turned the horizon white. The second came closer. By the third, every window in the academy had become opaque, automatically, shielding the students from the flash, while emergency sirens screamed through the corridors. Marcus was already moving. "Stay behind me." Lyra followed him toward the stairwell. "You spent 4 years teaching me not to do that." "I reserve the right to become hypocritical during bombardments." The floor shook hard enough to throw dust from the ceiling. Somewhere above, the tournament crowd had become a flood of frightened civilians pouring toward reinforced shelters. Academy instructors shouted orders through broken communication channels, while defense drones launched from hidden bays beneath the towers. Through a maintenance window, Lyra caught a brief glimpse of the sky. Vaelora's orbital shield flickered like cracked glass. Black ships were forcing their way through it, each surrounded by distorted rings of blue gravity. "Those aren't Imperial designs," she said. Marcus glanced upward. "No." "You recognize them?" "I recognize the part where they're shooting at us." A blast hit the western tower. The corridor twisted. Marcus shoved Lyra behind a support column a heartbeat before the ceiling collapsed. When the dust cleared, Marcus was on the ground beneath a fallen beam. Blood ran from his temple. "Marcus!" Lyra dropped beside him. His eyes opened slowly. "Good news." "What good news?" "I can still feel my legs." He tried to move and grimaced. "Bad news. They're complaining." 2 medical drones descended from the emergency rack. Lyra activated them, but Marcus caught her wrist. "Students in sub-level 4. "What?" "Tournament cadets. The shelter doors jammed when the grid failed." Another explosion rolled through the academy. Lyra looked toward the stairwell. "I'll get an instructor. Communications are down. Then I'll find someone." "Lyra," his voice stopped her. "You are someone." For one terrible second, she became 12 again, standing before a weapon she could not lift. Then another alarm sounded below them. She stood. Sublevel 4 held 32 cadets when Lyra reached it. Half were injured. The main exit had sealed automatically, and the backup tunnel was blocked by collapsed plating. Kaelor was trying to force open a maintenance door with 3 others. "Stop," Lyra said. He looked over his shoulder. "Unless you've suddenly become stronger than 4 people, that door opens into a coolant shaft." Kaelor froze. Lyra crossed to the emergency map and wiped dust from the display. Most systems were dead, but a thin red line still showed the old service tunnels beneath the academy. "There's another route. That tunnel was sealed years ago." "Not sealed. Reclassified." Kaelor frowned. "How do you know?" "Marcus made me run through it while being chased by musical drones." Nobody replied. Lyra pointed down the corridor. "Long story." They entered the tunnel in pairs. Gravity flickered unpredictably as the station regulators failed, sometimes making them nearly weightless, then slamming them back to the floor. Lyra used emergency magnetic clamps to keep the injured secured, while Kaelor carried one unconscious cadet over his shoulder. Halfway through, the lights died. Something metallic scraped ahead. A red optical sensor appeared in the darkness. Then another. Enemy machines. Lyra raised one hand. "Don't fire," Kaelor whispered. "They're coming toward us." "Exactly." She watched their movement. 4-legged reconnaissance drones, narrow enough for tunnels, equipped with pulse weapons. The first machine paused every 3 steps to scan structural signatures. "Maintenance junction behind us," she whispered. "Magnetic power conduit?" Kaelor nodded slowly. Lyra smiled. "Good." "Why are you smiling?" "Because Marcus has finally made me dangerous around expensive equipment." They retreated deliberately. The drones followed. Lyra waited until all 3 machines crossed the junction, then ripped open the emergency conduit and overloaded the magnetic field. The tunnel flashed violet. 2 drones slammed into the wall. The third fired wildly before Kaelor struck it with a broken support rod. Silence returned. Kaelor stared at Lyra. "You planned that quickly." "I panicked very efficiently." When they finally emerged near the civilian shelter complex, they found chaos. Enemy jamming had disabled Central Command, and officers were receiving contradictory reports. Lyra's group should have disappeared into the shelters. Instead, she saw something on one of the surviving tactical screens. The enemy drones were not spreading randomly. They were converging toward the oldest section of Valora, beneath the academy, beneath the city. "Why there?" she murmured. Kaelor leaned beside her. "Nothing's there." Lyra enlarged the map. "Then why are they willing to lose ships reaching it?" She traced the attack pattern with one finger. Every landing zone curved inward toward the same underground sector. Marcus's lessons returned to her. Never watch what the enemy says. Watch what they protect. Watch what they pursue. Watch what they fear losing. An officer approached. "Cadets, shelter immediately." Lyra turned. "Sir, they're targeting something under Sector 9. "Sector 9 has been abandoned for centuries." "Then they know something we don't." Another blast shook the command hall. The tactical screen flickered, briefly revealing hundreds of hostile signals. The officer hesitated. Lyra looked at Kaelor. "Get the others inside." "What are you doing?" "Finding Marcus." "And then?" Lyra stared at the red swarm moving toward Sector 9. For the first time, she felt the weight of other lives pressing against her decisions. It was heavier than any gravitic blade she had ever failed to lift. "Then," she said,
We figure out why an invasion fleet crossed half the system to dig under our school.
Kaelor gave a nervous laugh. You make that sound normal. Lyra started toward the corridor.
After training with a human, my standards for normal have become very disappointing.
Marcus was awake when Lyra returned, although the medical drones had wrapped enough stabilizing mesh around his ribs to make him look partially packaged for shipment.
You're supposed to be unconscious, she said.
Tried it. Boring. He pushed himself upright against the wall. Report. Lyra crouched beside him and projected the tactical map from her wrist display. Red points clustered beneath Sector 9.
They're not attacking the city. Not really. They're trying to reach something underground.
Marcus studied the pattern for several seconds. His humor vanished. There were rumors.
You knew?
I knew archaeologists found something beneath Valora 80 years ago, pre-colonial. They sealed the site after 3 researchers disappeared inside a gravitational anomaly. Lyra stared at him.
And nobody thought that was worth mentioning?
Governments have a remarkable talent for labeling terrifying things restricted information. He tried to stand and failed. Lyra caught his shoulder.
You're staying here.
I hate competent students.
You created this problem.
Marcus handed her a small human pulse pistol. Then go make it worse for them. By the time Lyra reached Sector 9, Kaelor had ignored her earlier order and gathered 11 cadets, 2 engineers, and a maintenance bot with 1 wheel missing. I told you to stay with the civilians. Kaelor shrugged. You also taught me that predictable people lose.
I never taught you that.
You said it constantly.
That was Marcus.
Humans are contagious. Beneath the abandoned district, they found an access shaft hidden behind centuries-old alloy plating. Enemy drones had already cut through half of it. Lyra's team entered through a collapsed ventilation channel and descended nearly 4 kilometers below the city. The deeper they went, the stranger gravity became. Dust drifted sideways. Loose stones hung motionless in the air. At one junction, Kaelor stepped forward and immediately floated toward the ceiling. Don't laugh, he warned. Lyra grabbed his boot and pulled him down. I would never. You're smiling. Gravity is smiling. At the bottom of the shaft stood a door large enough to admit a starship. No Valeran symbols marked it. Instead, lines of pale light moved across its surface like living veins. Enemy machines surrounded the entrance, connecting extraction equipment to ancient control nodes. Lyra watched from the shadows. They're trying to wake it. One engineer whispered, Wake what? The answer came when the floor began humming. The ancient door opened inward without touching anything. Beyond it stretched a chamber containing concentric rings suspended in empty space, each several hundred meters wide. They rotated soundlessly around a black sphere. Stars seemed to exist inside the sphere, bending and stretching, as if the object contained a piece of another sky. Kaelor swallowed. That seems unhealthy.
Excellent tactical analysis,
Lyra whispered. The enemy commander appeared below them, a tall armored figure linked to the machinery by cables of blue light. As his soldiers activated the final sequence, the rings accelerated. Every metal object in Lyra's group pulled violently toward the chamber. She understood immediately.
It's a gravity lattice.
The engineer's eyes widened. Planetary scale. Can we control it?
Possibly.
Can they?
In about 4 minutes.
Lyra looked at the tactical display. Valora's fleet was retreating in orbit. Enemy cruisers were descending toward the city. Conventional defense was already failing. She smiled slowly. Kaelor noticed. That is not a reassuring expression.
They came here for a weapon.
Yes.
So let's give them one.
Lyra divided the group. The engineers would access the ancient control interface, while Kaelor's cadets drew the enemy away. And you? Kaelor asked.
I'm going to convince their commander that he's winning.
That sounds dangerous.
Only if he believes me.
Lyra stepped openly onto the lower platform and fired Marcus's pistol into an enemy power relay. Every hostile sensor turned toward her. The commander raised his weapon. "Valoran," a translated voice boomed. "You are surrounded." Lyra glanced around theatrically. "I've had worse academy evaluations." He fired. She rolled behind a gravitic support column as Kaelor's team attacked from above. The chamber erupted into plasma fire. Lyra moved constantly, never staying where the enemy expected. Meanwhile, the engineers linked their systems to the ancient lattice. Symbols flooded Lyra's display, impossible equations describing mass, orbit, and spatial curvature. "We have access," one engineer shouted, "but the system needs coordinates." Lyra looked upward. Through the tactical network, she saw every enemy ship above Valora. Their formation was tightening around the planetary equator. Suddenly, Marcus's voice crackled through her comm. "Lyra, you're supposed to be resting." "I'm old. We don't follow instructions anymore." "I need orbital vectors." "Already sending them." Numbers filled her display. Lyra understood his plan instantly. Instead of using the lattice against the troops underground, she redirected it toward space. "That much energy could destabilize the entire sector," the engineer warned. "Then don't miss." She selected the enemy formation and opened a narrow gravitational corridor through Valora's defenses. From orbit, it looked like failure. The hostile fleet took the bait. One cruiser entered, then 3, then 14. They accelerated toward the planet, believing the shield had collapsed. Lyra waited until every major ship committed to the approach. "Now!" The ancient rings stopped. For half a second, nothing happened. Then space above Valora folded. Enemy cruisers were caught inside a massive invisible well and dragged sideways into a rotating orbital trap. Engines burned at full power, but could not escape. Ships collided with their own formation as the gravity lattice compressed their paths into a tightening spiral. Across the tactical network, Valoran officers stared in disbelief. The enemy commander below Lyra screamed an order and charged her. She sidestepped his first blow, ducked the second, then triggered a local gravity inversion beneath him. His armored body rose helplessly toward the ceiling. Lyra looked up. "Strength problem?" Kaelor laughed so loudly she heard him over the alarms. Minutes later, the surviving enemy ships retreated beyond the system. Valora remained scarred, burning in places, but alive. When Lyra returned to the surface, soldiers who had once barely noticed her stood aside as she passed. Marcus waited outside the medical station in a hovering chair. "I hear you hijacked prehistoric technology and rearranged an invasion fleet." Lyra stopped in front of him. "You told me to become the first one of me." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I was hoping that version would be slightly less expensive." She laughed, but then looked toward the damaged academy towers. For the first time, nobody around her was looking at the frail girl who had failed to lift a blade. They were looking at the warrior who had saved their world. 3 years passed before the Sovereign Dawn returned to Valora. By then, the academy towers had been rebuilt with reinforced gravity cores. The ancient lattice beneath Sector 9 had been sealed behind 12 layers of security, and Lyra had learned that being called a hero was almost as uncomfortable as being called weak. Her rank had changed. Her uniform had changed. Even the way soldiers looked at her had changed. But whenever someone introduced her as the warrior who had broken an invasion fleet, Marcus still muttered, "She also once lost a fight with a cup of water." Lyra had threatened to erase that story from the military archives. Marcus had informed her he kept backups. The return signal from the Sovereign Dawn arrived just before dawn. Lyra stood inside the orbital command chamber when the exploration cruiser emerged from a helix jump corridor wrapped in blue spatial distortion. Its hull was scarred, one engine burned unevenly, and half its outer sensor array was missing. Around Lyra, officers cheered. She did not. She simply stared. Somewhere aboard that damaged ship was the woman she had spent years imagining in different ways. Proud, disappointed, relieved, distant, unchanged. Commander Seraya stepped onto Valoran soil 6 hours later. She looked older than Lyra remembered. There were faint silver strands in her dark hair and a fresh scar running beneath one eye, but her posture remained unmistakable. Strong, controlled, certain. She greeted generals, exchanged reports, and finally asked the question she had been carrying across unknown space. "Where is my daughter?" Marcus, standing nearby with a cane he rarely needed but greatly enjoyed pointing at people, smiled. "Complicated answer." Seraya frowned. "Is she safe?" "Usually." "Usually?" "She has a flexible relationship with danger." Before Marcus could say more, the base alarms activated. Red lights swept across the landing deck. A synthetic voice announced unidentified vessels entering Velora's outer system. Seraya's hand went immediately to the weapon at her hip. "How many?" "7," an officer replied. "Possibly more behind them." Marcus sighed. "You see? Flexible." Seraya was already running toward command. She expected to find senior officers organizing the defense. Instead, when the command doors opened, she saw a young woman standing at the center of the tactical floor, issuing orders while holographic ships rotated around her. Long blonde hair was tied tightly behind her head. Her face was pale and almost human, elegant rather than imposing, framed by the long ears Seraya would have recognized anywhere. Dark combat armor followed the lines of a lean body that still lacked the massive build prized by Veloran tradition. Yet every veteran in the room was listening to her. "Move orbital batteries 3 and 5 to silent mode," the young woman ordered. "Do not reveal the lattice. Let them think our defenses are conventional." "Commander Lyra," an officer said. "Their lead ship is requesting communication." Seraya stopped breathing for a moment. Lyra turned. Their eyes met across the command chamber. Everything else seemed to fall away. The alarms, the officers, the holograms, the years. Seraya saw the little girl who had once struggled to hold the training blade. Lyra saw the mother who had disappeared into a star corridor, carrying promises that arrived months late. Neither moved. Then Lyra smiled slightly. "Hello, Mother." Seraya crossed the room before discipline could stop her, and pulled Lyra into her arms. For the first time since returning, her composure broke. "Look at you," she whispered. Lyra held her tightly. "I can carry the blade now." Marcus's voice came from the doorway. "She still complains about the weight." Lyra closed her eyes. "I knew you would ruin this moment." Seraya laughed through tears she had not expected to shed. The reunion lasted only seconds before the tactical display flashed crimson. The unidentified ships altered formation. Lyra stepped back immediately. Seraya noticed it then, not merely confidence, but command instinct. Her daughter's attention moved from emotion to threat without becoming cold. "What do you need from me?" Seraya asked. Lyra hesitated, perhaps surprised by the question. "Your expedition encountered ships beyond the Helix frontier?" "Yes." Seraya approached the hologram. "These are not the same design, but the propulsion signature is similar." Marcus leaned on his cane. "Meaning?" "They may be connected to the fleet that attacked Velora years ago." The incoming transmission opened before anyone could respond. A masked figure appeared above the tactical table. "Velora," it said through a mechanical translator. "Surrender the gravity lattice beneath your world." Seraya looked sharply at Lyra. "Gravity lattice?" Marcus raised one hand. "There are several things we should probably explain." Lyra folded her arms. "Several?" "I was aiming for a calming word." The hostile figure continued. "Refusal will result in planetary cleansing." The transmission ended. Silence filled the room. Seraya studied her daughter. "You have a plan?" Lyra looked at the enemy formation for several seconds. "They expect us to defend the lattice." "So?" "We won't." Seraya's eyebrows lifted. Lyra enlarged the system map.
We'll make them believe we've already moved it.
Marcus smiled. There she is. Seraya glanced between them.
Moved a planetary gravity system? Obviously impossible, Lyra said, which is why they'll believe only someone desperate enough would try. That makes no sense. Marcus taught me. That explains even less.
Marcus looked offended. I'm standing right here. For the first time, Seraya saw what years had done. The daughter she had feared leaving helpless was now surrounded by people who trusted her judgment. Lyra did not resemble the warrior Seraya had imagined for her. She was something stranger, subtler, and perhaps far more dangerous. Then Lyra picked up her short gravitic blade and attached it to her armor. Seraya stared at the effortless motion. Lyra noticed. What? Seraya shook her head slowly, unable to hide her astonishment.
Nothing.
Marcus leaned closer to her. That's the same blade she dropped in front of the entire academy. Lyra pointed toward the exit.
Marcus?
Yes?
Go be medically retired somewhere else.
Seraya laughed, and for the first time since returning from the dark beyond the frontier, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel for years. Pride. The enemy fleet crossed Valora's outer defense line precisely as Lyra expected. 7 ships became 11, then 14, each releasing black interceptor drones that spread across orbit like shards of broken glass. Seraya stood beside her daughter on the command deck, watching tactical projections turn red. Years earlier, she would have taken control without hesitation. Now she waited.
They're forming a capture pattern, Seraya said. They still think the lattice has been moved.
Lyra nodded.
Good.
Marcus, seated behind them with his cane across his knees, frowned at the display. I dislike plans where good means 14 warships are approaching.
You taught me that, Lyra replied.
I regret many things. Lyra had ordered engineers to transmit false gravitic signatures from 3 unmanned cargo vessels launched toward Valora's moon. The enemy divided immediately, sending half its fleet after the decoys. The remaining vessels descended toward the capital, convinced the real control core was still below. It was exactly the mistake Lyra needed. Activate the old lattice, she ordered. Deep beneath Sector 9, ancient rings awakened. Gravity rippled through the planet's crust and climbed into orbit. But instead of trapping the enemy as before, Lyra used the system to distort their targeting sensors. Valoran ships vanished from hostile instruments, appearing hundreds of kilometers from their true positions.
They'll compensate, Seraya warned.
I know.
Then why reveal the system?
Lyra looked at her. Because I want them to adapt. Seraya stared for half a second, then understood.
You're teaching them the wrong battlefield.
Exactly. The enemy shifted formation, relying on visual targeting and close-range weapons. That forced them into the narrow orbital corridor Lyra had left intentionally clear. Valoran fighters struck from above while hidden defense batteries fired from below. The battle became violent and close. Plasma bursts illuminated the atmosphere. 2 enemy cruisers collided after a gravity pulse altered their trajectories, but the hostile flagship continued descending. Seraya's expression hardened.
They're going for Sector 9 personally.
Then we meet them. Lyra left command with Seraya, Kaelor, and a small strike team. Marcus tried to follow. Lyra blocked the doorway.
No.
I'm still combat capable.
You complained yesterday because the lift was slow.
That was tactical criticism.
Stay here.
Marcus sighed. Fine. But if you all die, I'm giving the memorial speech and making it embarrassing. The enemy commander entered the ancient chamber beneath Sector 9, just as Lyra's team arrived. His armor was heavier than before, reinforced with gravitic plating that made every movement shake the floor. Seraya drew her long plasma blade. Lyra drew the short weapon she had once been unable to lift. The commander charged. Seraya met him directly, blade against blade, but his armor amplified his strength. He drove her backward. Lyra did not rush in. She watched. Left shoulder lowered before a heavy strike. Right heel rotated before he changed direction. Power surged through the chest plate half a second before the gravity field intensified. Patterns. Always patterns. Seraya was thrown against a pillar. Lyra stepped between them. "Move!" Seraya shouted. The commander attacked. Lyra ducked, pivoted, struck the joint beneath his arm, then retreated. He swung again. She let him follow. Every attack pulled him farther across the chamber toward the inner gravity ring. "You cannot overpower me," he said through his translator. Lyra smiled. "That would be a very strange thing for me to try." She struck the control node beside her. Gravity reversed. The commander's massive armor became his weakness. He slammed upward into the ring structure, pinned by the very field designed to make him stronger. Seraya stared.
You planned that?
Mostly.
Mostly?
The part where he nearly broke my shoulder was less intentional. Seraya laughed, despite herself. Together they disabled the armor and forced his surrender. Without their commander, the remaining enemy ships withdrew. Those trapped near the moon were captured after discovering Lyra's relocated lattice consisted of 3 empty cargo vessels broadcasting counterfeit energy signatures. Marcus later called it the most expensive prank in Vaeloran military history. The war ended within days. Evidence recovered from the flagship revealed the attackers had spent decades searching for ancient gravity technologies across multiple systems. Vaelora shared its findings with neighboring worlds under strict safeguards, ending the secrecy that had made the planet vulnerable in the first place. Seraya chose not to leave again. She accepted a command position in Vaelora's orbital defense and spent the following years rebuilding something far more difficult than a fleet: time with her daughter. Their relationship was awkward at first. Seraya wanted to compensate for every missed birthday, every unanswered transmission, every night Lyra had been alone. Lyra eventually told her, "You can't repair 3 years in 3 weeks." Seraya nodded.
How long?
"Maybe 3 years.
That seems unfair.
Commanders are allowed to lie optimistically." They both laughed. Marcus retired officially 6 months later, and unofficially continued appearing at the academy every morning. Kaelor became an instructor and never again mocked a student for physical weakness. Above the academy entrance, the old inscription declaring that strength was the foundation of victory was removed. In its place stood words chosen by Lyra. Strength has more than one shape. Years later, a small alien girl stood in the training hall holding a gravitic blade she could barely lift. Her arms shook. Other students watched. Lyra, now wearing the insignia of Academy Commander, approached quietly. The girl's long ears lowered with embarrassment.
"I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm weak."
Lyra looked at the blade, then at the frightened child. For an instant she saw herself again, 12 years old, pale hands trembling, laughter pressing in from every direction. She gently took the weapon away and set it aside.
"Good,"
Lyra said. The girl blinked.
"Good? Now we know what kind of warrior you're not."
Marcus, older and grayer, watched from the doorway with Seraya beside him. Lyra crouched to the child's level and smiled.
"Let's find out what kind you are."
The girl slowly smiled back. And somewhere far beneath Vaelora, the ancient gravity rings turned silently in the dark. No longer symbols of fear or power, but reminders that even the greatest forces in the universe could change direction when someone understood how they truly worked.